Lucifer is not where you think he is, not in some distant realm, not in a place you can see, but closer, much closer. What if he doesn't need to appear? Because he already exists in the only place that matters, your mind. Because the truth is, Lucifer doesn't need to control the world. He only needs to influence the way you see it. One thought, one belief, one small idea that feels completely yours. And once you accept it, everything changes. So the real question is, are you living your life or following something you never questioned? Lucifer's influence was never meant to remain in the past. If his power truly lies in shaping perception rather than commanding action, then time does not weaken him, it refines him. The ancient world may have feared shadows, but the modern world has learned to ignore them. And that is precisely where his influence becomes most effective. Because today, darkness no longer needs to hide. It blends in, it adapts, it becomes part of what feels normal. Look around. The world moves fast, faster than ever before. People wake up, scroll, react, compare, decide. Every moment filled with input, every second shaping thought. But within that constant flow, something subtle happens. The line between what is truly yours and what has been influenced begins to blur. Because influence today does not feel like pressure. It feels like choice. A thought appears, simple, harmless. It feels like it came from you. Maybe it begins as comparison, someone else's life, someone else's success, someone else's image. That comparison turns into a feeling. That feeling grows into desire. And that desire slowly becomes direction, step by step, without resistance, without question. And by the time it shapes your actions, it already feels like who you are. That is how influence works now. Not through force, but through familiarity. Lucifer does not need to stand in front of humanity. He stands within its patterns, in the way people define success, in the way they measure worth, in the way they react without thinking and believe without questioning. The modern world is built on systems of repetition, ideas repeated until they feel true, emotions repeated until they feel justified, behaviors repeated until they become identity. And once something becomes identity, it is no longer questioned. That is where influence becomes invisible, because people do not resist what they believe is part of themselves. They defend it, they protect it, even when it leads them further away from clarity. The noise of the modern world makes this even stronger. Endless information, endless opinions, endless perspectives, each one pulling attention in different directions. And in that noise, truth does not disappear. It becomes harder to recognize. So people turn inward. They trust their own thoughts, their own instincts, their own understanding. But what if that understanding has already been shaped? What if the thoughts you trust the most were never entirely yours to begin with? Lucifer does not need to control the world. He only needs to influence how you see it. Because once perception is shaped, reality follows. In the modern world, influence no longer moves slowly. It spreads instantly, silently, and endlessly. What once took generations to shape can now take minutes. A single idea appears, and before it can be questioned, it is already everywhere, repeated, reinforced, accepted. And the more it is seen, the more real it begins to feel. Not because it is true, but because it is familiar. That is the nature of digital influence. Every day, people are exposed to thousands of signals, images, opinions, reactions, narratives, each one subtly shaping perception. Most of it goes unnoticed, not because it is hidden, but because it feels natural. You scroll, you watch, you react. And with each interaction, something small is reinforced inside your mind. A preference, a belief, a direction. Over time, those small reinforcements begin to form patterns, and patterns become perspective. Lucifer does not need to create chaos in a world like this. The system already does the work for him. Because repetition is power, an idea repeated once is ignored. Repeated twice, it is considered. Repeated endlessly, it becomes truth. Not absolute truth, but perceived truth. And perception is enough. The digital world amplifies this effect to a level never seen before. Content is designed to capture attention, to trigger emotion, to keep people engaged. And emotion is the key, because emotion bypasses logic. It moves faster than reason. It makes people react before they reflect. And once a reaction happens, the idea behind it becomes stronger. Lucifer understands this principle perfectly. He does not force belief. He accelerates it. He amplifies what already exists. Doubt becomes insecurity. Insecurity becomes desire. Desire becomes obsession. And obsession drives behavior. All without a single moment of direct control. The most dangerous part is that people participate willingly. They share what moves them. They defend what they feel. They repeat what they believe. And in doing so, they strengthen the very influence shaping them. What begins as a single thought can become a collective mindset. Entire groups of people moving in the same direction, believing they arrived there on their own. But alignment does not always mean truth. Sometimes it simply means the influence was strong enough to feel universal. And once something feels universal, it becomes unquestionable. That is the modern battlefield. Not a place of visible conflict, but a space of constant input. A system where influence does not need to hide, because it is everywhere. Flowing through screens, through conversations, through everyday life. Lucifer does not need a throne. He has something far more powerful. A world that shapes itself through the thoughts people believe are their own. The most powerful place influence exists is not in the world around you. It is within you. It lives in the voice you trust the most, the one that speaks without sound, guiding your decisions, shaping your reactions, defining what you believe is right, true, or necessary. That voice feels personal. It feels real. It feels like you. And that is exactly why it is so difficult to question. Because people rarely doubt the thoughts that come from within. They follow them. They act on them. They build their lives around them. But what if not every thought is entirely your own? What if influence does not come from outside forces, but from subtle shifts within your own thinking? Lucifer does not need to replace your thoughts. He only needs to redirect them, just slightly, just enough to change the direction over time. A small doubt where there was once clarity. A small desire where there was once contentment. A small justification where there was once hesitation. Each shift feels insignificant on its own, almost invisible. But over time, those small changes begin to connect. They form patterns, and those patterns shape perspective. Once a perspective is formed, it begins to guide everything. How you interpret situations, how you react to others, how you define yourself. And the most dangerous part is that it all feels natural. It feels like growth, like self-discovery, like becoming who you are meant to be. But influence does not need to feel unnatural to be effective. In fact, the more natural it feels, the less it is questioned. That is why it is so powerful. Because by the time you begin to notice the pattern, it is no longer something external that can simply be removed. It has already become part of how you think, part of how you see the world. And once something becomes part of your perception, it shapes your reality. Quietly, consistently, without resistance. That is the true nature of influence. Not control from the outside, but transformation from within. The real question is not whether influence exists. It always has. The real question is whether you are aware of it while it is happening. Because awareness is the only thing that separates control from illusion. Most people move through life without ever stopping to examine the origin of their thoughts. They feel something, they believe it, and they act on it. It happens so quickly, so naturally, that it never feels like something worth questioning. But that is exactly where influence becomes most powerful, when it operates without resistance, without interruption, without awareness. Lucifer does not need to hide in darkness if no one is looking for him. He exists in the space between thought and action, the moment where a decision is about to be made. And in that moment, the smallest shift can change everything. A thought that leans slightly toward pride instead of humility. A reaction that chooses anger instead of patience. A belief that prioritizes self over truth. None of these feel extreme. None of them feel wrong in the moment. But over time, they build, slowly, quietly, consistently, until they form a pattern that begins to define who you are. That is the nature of influence. It does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. It only needs to be consistent. The moment you stop questioning your thoughts is the moment they begin to control you. Because unexamined thoughts become assumptions. Assumptions become beliefs, and beliefs shape reality. Once something feels like truth, it is rarely challenged. It becomes the foundation for every decision that follows. And that is where influence reaches its deepest level. Not in what you do, but in why you do it. But there is one thing that breaks this pattern. Awareness. The moment you step back and observe your own thinking, something changes. You create distance between yourself and your thoughts. You begin to see them not as absolute truth, but as something that can be examined, questioned, even rejected. That moment is uncomfortable because it challenges identity. It forces you to ask questions most people avoid. Why do I believe this? Where did this idea come from? Is this truly mine, or was it shaped over time without me realizing it? Lucifer's influence depends on one thing, unquestioned acceptance. Because once you begin to question, the illusion starts to weaken. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to create a crack in the pattern. And through that crack, clarity begins to return. But here is the truth most people never realize. Awareness is not a one-time moment. It is a continuous choice. Because influence never stops. It adapts. It evolves. It finds new ways to feel natural, to feel right, to feel like you. And that means awareness must be constant, not just in what you do, but in how you think. So the real question is not just whether Lucifer exists. It is whether you are paying attention. While he works, Lucifer doesn't need to appear. He doesn't need to be seen. Because if his influence is real, then it was never about where he is, but how he works. Not in the shadows around you, but in the thoughts within you. Every choice, every belief, every moment you don't question. That's where it begins. And maybe that's where it's already happening. So before this ends, ask yourself one thing. Are those thoughts truly yours, or have they been guiding you all along?